Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and as we do on this day, it is the third Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock hour is our time with Dr. Ramona Probasco, author of Healing Well and Living Free from an Abusive Relationship, from Victim to Survivor to Overcomer. She holds a doctorate in psychology and has conducted extensive research in the area of domestic violence. She's a marriage and family therapist, a certified domestic violence counselor, and a nationally certified counselor. She's been in private practice for over 20 years. Dr. Ramona is an expert and sought-after speaker on domestic violence and how to authentically heal well from the trauma it causes. As a personal overcomer of domestic violence, she offers guidance and insight to others based on both her clinical experience and her own experience of moving from victim to survivor to overcomer. She's the mother of 3 incredible adult children and 2 wonderful adult children through remarriage, and she now thoroughly enjoys being the wife of a husband who absolutely adores her. You can find her online at healingwellandlivingfree.com. Dr. Ramona Probasco, welcome back to Revealing the Truth and to your hour of Healing Well and Living Free.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. This is a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. It's so good to connect with you again. We missed you last month, but we're back on track. And you said October is National
Domestic Violence Awareness Month. You'll notice the purple ribbons everywhere.
Okay, good.
Just
so
remembering people who have been murdered because of domestic violence or in abusive relationships.
Okay, so our October 15th show will be dedicated to that very topic, and we'll just continue along that theme. You know, you start out with your personal story, but you really ask some questions, and some of those questions are you or someone you love keeping secrets about your relationship because you feel ashamed or fear no one will believe you? Are you or someone you love isolating yourself from family and friends? Are you or someone you love permitting yourself to be treated with disrespect, disregard, or disdain? Are you or someone you love minimizing or making excuses for an intimate partner's harmful behavior? Are you or someone you love feeling afraid of your intimate partner? If you answered yes to any of the above, you may be in an abusive relationship. In your lifetime, Dr. Ramona, there was a period of time when you answered yes to every one of these questions. Tell us just a little bit about that story.
The questions that I listed there, I mean, I could have written so many more, but these are the typical feelings, thoughts, experiences that people go through when they are keeping a secret of intimate partner violence. You know, most of us, we don't get married. We don't say I do to say I don't. And there's shame that is connected with this realization that the person I thought I married is not turning out to be who they portrayed themselves to be initially. And so there's a ton of shame, secrecy, hiding that is involved with these kind of relationships.
You had personal experience in this area. You lived through this, and that was really the reason why you wrote the book Healing Well and Living Free from an Abusive Relationship, was because you made it from victim to survivor to overcomer. And this is the story of your journey through that, what you were able to glean from your own experience. And then, as God would use what the enemy meant for evil, God would use for his good so that many would be healed, many would be saved. The same message that Joseph delivered to his brothers in Genesis chapter 50. This is the message that you bring as well, that you lived through this, and here's what you did. And you don't have to live in California and have to go to your practice to be able to kind of walk through this journey with you and to make it to the other side, and then be willing to ask for help to find a therapist that's going to take you the rest of the way. This kind of is the therapy in the privacy of your home that takes you on that journey that should bring you to tears, as it did me, to bring you to a deeper understanding of what this problem is. Kind of give us an idea, if you will, of how rampant, how much of an epidemic this is in regards to how many women in the United States are living in these conditions?
That's a good word because it is an epidemic. Globally, 1 in 3 women will experience some form of intimate partner violence in her lifetime. And in the United States, it's 1 in 4. So, you know, when I went to church, we obviously went to church yesterday, and I was sitting there just kind of looking around. We go to a large church, and I'm looking at all the faces, and I remember, Eric, when I was one of those people. You know, 1 in 3 globally, 1 in 4 in the U.S. It's everywhere, but again, it's the big secret, so people don't talk about it.
You know, this mask that we wear, this Academy Award-winning performance that we present to the public, this face that, especially with social media, you present this view of this happy couple, and here's the highlight reel from this trip together, and this is the magic moment where we're standing before on the red carpet when we went to the premiere of this, or we went to this award, or my husband just won this award, and you're trying to affirm him, and you're trying to feed into his narcissistic, his abusive, his shame-based response to things, trying to get you to receive the pain that he himself is struggling with, and the only outlet he has is to inflict that pain on you. And that's his motivation, is to release that pain by inflicting pain on another, and it's a vicious cycle.
Right. That's why it's referred to as intimate partner violence, because this type of behavior typically only takes place in the context of an intimate relationship. So you're right, it's directed towards the intimate partner. And I did, Eric, for years, I tried to, I guess in a sense, protect our reputation, protect his reputation. And abusers, they have a dual presentation. The way they look to the public and the way that they behave privately are totally 2 different worlds. So how people saw us in public, many later, as my story came out, are still, as I'm talking to people, are shocked because that's not how it looked. And that's not just the case with me. That's with people that are going through this right now. That's why I'm saying, when I was at church, I'm looking around and I'm like, Lord, who is suffering in this type of situation now? Because no one would have known. We were in ministry. No one would have known. No one did know.
You know, the shocking reality is that no one is immune. We see the same percentages of domestic violence and domestic abuse in Christian homes as we do in non-Christian homes. And this is probably the most troubling part to me about the entire equation, is that factor is that we are to esteem the other more than ourselves. We are to serve the other. We are to, husbands, love your wives. We are to, this cord of 3 strands that King Solomon so beautifully weaves, and here you are in ministry and have the appearance of this beautiful cord of 3 strands, and the world sees and looks upon it and says, isn't this glorious and wonderful? But every one of those strands is frayed, and every one of those strands is chafed and is really not strong enough to support any tension on it whatsoever. So instead of it being applied, it's displayed. It's now put in a shadow box, and we refer to it as our marriage is a cord of 3 strands, because I can point to it on the wall because it's under too much strain to survive what I'm going through. And it portrays a very false picture.
Interesting that you bring that verse into our conversation, because that's the exact one that we had read at our wedding ceremony. And I remember, because we were young believers, and I remember when I came across that verse, I was like, that's the perfect picture of how marriage is supposed to be, the husband and wife with the Holy Spirit, you know, wrapping around them. And talk about strain, but that strain wasn't caused by God. That strain was caused by abuse.
It's interesting. I perform a wedding just in June. I've got several weddings lined up, and I actually use that passage of Scripture. But the way I use it in my message to the couple is that over the test of time, that beautiful cord of 3 strands that's silver and gold and bright and shiny, over 50 years, when I look at that cord, it's wrapped in duct tape. Because if we don't treat it where it's frayed and patch it where it's frayed and deal with it all the way along the line, it's going to break. And so after 50 years, we see this long strand of very ugly gray duct tape, but hidden beneath it is this cord of 3 strands. Now it cannot be broken because you can't take a wad of duct tape after it's wrapped together and pull it apart. And that's what a happy 50-year marriage looks like. It's not all glistening and shiny. It's something that's been laid on the floor, kicked under the bed, thrown out the window, hanging and being drugged by the car. There are so many things that are coming against it that unless we wrap it and we tape it and we patch it, then it cannot stand the test of this earth.
You know, that's interesting what you said about coming against it. External things happening to us, okay? People, we lose jobs, we get sick, our kids act squirrely. I mean, things happen to us. Abuse is different. Abuse is something that a person intentionally chooses to behave like. That's not the same. What you're describing, and I like your metaphor there with the duct tape. Of course, my parents have been married over 50 years. They've gone through a ton of things. But if things coming against you versus imploding because of abuse is very different.
The victims of abuse, is this a Stockholm Syndrome kind of situation where psychologically we are somehow negatively feeding the negative parts of ourselves, and that affirms our negative, whether or not it's from childhood trauma or we have had something that we were talking earlier about shame and our conversation with Dr. Mark Baker about shame being at the very core, is that abuse is affirming to one who feels shame. It's so perverted, it's so perverse in its the way it feeds. You wonder, how can anybody, how could you have even stayed one day past the first abusive occurrence, knowing that you are so intelligent and so qualified and why and how, and why isn't the whistle blown like immediately? Why isn't the red flag goes up and the doors are locked and they're kicked to the curb immediately? How does it happen? I can understand it happening once, but then it happens twice, and then it happens 5 times, and then it occurs over a period of years. And how does that? What is that goes on inside? What was that going on inside of you, and going on inside of these others?
Well, it's a lot like the proverbial frog in the pot, example. It doesn't start where you're in a pot of boiling water. Of course, all frogs would jump out of boiling water, but we know that that's not what happens. The water slowly gets turned up. So, and then they boil to death. In my own case, the dating years, we dated long distance for, part of the 3.5 years. So it didn't give me a good, I didn't have really we weren't together every day. We were far apart, and when we did see each other, it was bliss. Because we were only together for a short time because he joined the military. Plus, these relationships are complicated. They start off often very charismatic. You feel many women feel swept off their feet. These men are very charming. And the abuse, Eric, doesn't start typically until attachment is secured. So Jekyll is all you see. Hyde doesn't show up until they sense that you are emotionally attached. And in my own case, everybody has their own story, but there was a lot going on in my family of origin at the time where I felt like the carpet had been pulled out from underneath me. And like I talk about in my book, I didn't accept Christ as my personal Lord and Savior until I was 17. And my father thought that I had joined a cult because I started going to Bible study, and that was odd. And I was raised with a lot of religion, and he just didn't understand it. And he basically gave me an ultimatum that you either stop what you're doing or you leave. And I was a senior in high school. And I just knew that what I had found in Christ was not something I could just walk away from. My commitment was sincere. And so I moved out towards the beginning of my senior year. And that was right around the time when I had met Ben. I met Ben shortly before that. Plus, Ben was the first one to share Christ with me. So can you kind of see it was a real mind bender, the charisma, the charm, the attention, talking to me about the Lord. I accept Christ. I get kicked out. Ben is there, my knight in shining armor. It solidified our bond. Okay. And then in these relationships, Eric, there is a pattern. There's a cycle referred to as the cycle of abuse, where like in my own case, where I felt the tension. I felt like, ooh, Ben is upset, or, kind of walking on eggshells. And the tension can go on for days, months, a year or more. In my own case, it started off just, not every day, but I just sensed that I had to, in a sense, give him what he wanted, or he would punish me in some way. But in between those times, it was pure bliss and fun and doing things and dinners and lots of laughter, So in this cycle, it's the tension, then you have some sort of explosion, quickly followed by a honeymoon period. And that honeymoon period is in a sense, positive conditioning that keeps people in a negative pattern. And they don't see it. It's referred to in psychology as intermittent conditioning, where you are positively rewarded, and intermittently there's something negative, but you never know when the negative is going to happen. So it strengthens the bond. So that person that's on the recipient end of the abuse is always wondering, well, what did I do? Last time it seemed like I did this time I did this. It keeps you off balance, always wondering and always trying to secure that honeymoon and make that honeymoon stage last indefinitely, but it doesn't. It goes round and round and round the cycle.
Is there any correlation between what you're talking about and narcissism, or this what I've experienced in my own life, and I shared with you in our last interview, is that over a 15-year period, that the mark always moved, even if it was the exact same conditions, exact same standards. No matter what it was, if I did it the same way I did it the last time, which I thought was the right way because I was following the instructions to a T, if I followed them to the same degree and the same set of instructions and the exact same way, that it caused a terrible blow up because it was the wrong way. I could never make the connection between what changed when the last time I did it because, but the last time was the same thing as the time before, but it's like you shoot the arrow, and right as soon as the arrow is about to hit the target, somebody has a rope on the target and they just nudge it over just a little bit and it misses completely, and that causes a huge blow up. And I began to see that as a form of narcissism, because this was the constant, and it never stopped. It was unceasing. There was never enough. Couldn't do anything right. Never enough. Always the need for more. It was impossible. It was impossible.
Well, because it wasn't about you, and it wasn't about what you did or did not do. in regards to what you refer to the narcissistic personality disorder, certainly some abusers have a bona fide mental health condition, such as narcissism or borderline personality, or but statistically most do not. So in the case, if someone is in a relationship with a narcissist, they are going to experience inevitable harm. They are going to experience some kind of abuse. But not all abusers have that type of condition. Abuse is about a mindset, Eric. It's driven primarily by lack of empathy and entitlement. Also, power and control. So a person does not have to have any sort of diagnosis, if you will, to have those qualities.
I've been listening to I don't know if he's in Romania or Czechoslovakia, I forget where he's from, but he was talking about therapy, and the avoidance of real therapy is that people who, they might go to a psychiatrist or a psychopharmacologist for medication, but they won't go into real therapy where they're willing to address. So they might say, I've been diagnosed with an anxiety or bipolar or whatever the litany of diagnoses are, but it's done from the psychiatric, and therefore there's medication, but never the depth of counseling necessary. And I'm dealing with a personal situation right now in regards to that, where the person very, very, very close to me is willing to go to a psychiatrist and take a medication, but not willing to go to a therapist to talk about the issues. And the excuse is, but I am seeing somebody and I am doing something about it, but I say you're treating the symptoms, but not the cause. And there's a great deal of rebellion and strife involved in this. Is this a pattern?
Well, first of all, there's no pill on this planet that can cure an abuser, because again, it's about a mentality. Likewise, for myself, if all I did was seek medication, just like you're saying, that would be covering up the wound and not healing it. So I had to dig deep to look at my own beliefs, many of which were very faulty regarding myself, relationships, even God. I had a lot of misunderstanding about the heart of God that kept me in this relationship way beyond, like you said, why not leave the first time it happens? Well, when you have faulty thinking, you can hang in there for a long time. So as far as medication is wonderful, and I'm glad that we have that, because there's definitely a place for it. However, it's not going to cure an abusive mentality, and it's not going to heal a broken heart.
We're talking with Dr. Ramona Probasco, author of Healing Well and Living Free from an Abusive Relationship, from Victim to Survivor to Overcomer. Dr. Ramona is a featured guest here, and we share this hour because 1 in 3 women around the world, 1 in 4 American women in the United States are in abusive relationships. And this means it's an epidemic. You're talking about 25% of those women in a relationship are in an abusive relationship. And you may not realize it. You may be this frog and the water's cool and comfortable because the heat hasn't been turned up yet. And what we want to do is help you get to the point where you recognize it before the water reaches a boiling level, and to get help. And when we return from break, we're going to talk about some of the steps you can take to healing well and living free from an abusive relationship. We've given you some tips about how to recognize. We'll give you some more tips how to recognize that you're in an abusive relationship. We gave you some questions to answer. We'll ask you some more, but we're going to share with you some of the steps in how to heal well and live free from an abusive relationship with Dr. Ramona Probasco. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and as we do on the third Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock hour, we host Dr. Ramona Probasco, author of Healing Well and Living Free from an Abusive Relationship, from Victim to Survivor to Overcomer. Dr. Ramona, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be with you.
You know, I shared with you that I was in an abusive relationship. And I kind of thought that I was maybe the anomaly, that I was a guy that was being really pretty verbally abused, not physically abused, but emotionally abused. Love was the weapon of choice that was used in my home. It was as conditional and performance-based, complete lack of respect, which of course Ephesians tells us that husbands love your wives, wives respect your husband. It was, and in ministry, again, the face to the nations of being this perfect idyllic couple, but actually didn't even live in the same part of the house. I had a mother-in-law suite that was built on one end of the house. There was a 3-car garage. There was the main house. Didn't even live in the same, but gave all appearances. And then finally, the whole thing, the house of cards finally collapsed. And I was able to biblically extract myself. But for 15 years, I didn't have a biblical reason to extract myself from the marriage. So I felt that because I didn't, I was obligated by the boundaries of Scripture that I did not have the biblical reason, and therefore I couldn't divorce this person. So I had to find a way to live, and truly played Psalm 13 on my iPhone over and over again. How long, O Lord, will you be silent? How long will you look upon me and not answer? How long will you see the sorrow of my heart? And would literally cry on my way to go preach. Every single time I had to preach, because it was just breaking me. And I thought I was the only guy in the world that was going through this. But yet you shared something with me that you wanted to share with our audience, which actually brings me a great deal of comfort.
Yes, 1 in 7 men in the U.S. experience some form of severe physical violence. So it's very, very important that we do not forget about all the guys out there that are going through this. And it's hard for women to break the silence, but for men and the cultural pressure that's put on guys, I mean, it can feel near impossible. And just like you said, you felt like you were the only one. Well, guess not. You're not. It's 1 in 7, so it's really, I've worked with men in my practice, and the courage that it takes for them to finally get there and admit that that their wife or girlfriend and is abusing them. It's very hard. It's very hard.
Yeah.
My heart goes out for the guys.
And mine does as well. This is the reason why I share publicly that I was in this, to bring men an understanding that this is real, and that what you're going through, there is help. They're the same pattern and the same steps to healing well and living free apply to men as well as to women. Although statistically it's a lower number, but love in this situation was the weapon of choice. It was used as a weapon, and that's not the tool or instrument that God ever developed to become a weapon. It's supposed to be a healing balm. It's supposed to be a source of joy and comfort, and instead it can be incredibly destructive when it's used as a weapon, and especially in the area of performance. And men are most often defined by their job or by their vocation, and you find great comfort and solace in the fact that you're the breadwinner and the provider, and that you're doing the right things and taking care of your family. But when you're attacked at that personal level, the cutting of eyes, the look of disdain, those things cut to the very quick and hurt deeply, even to the tough guy, even to the Hebrew who thick-skinned and impenetrable armor, cut to the core by this constant rejection and this constant critical, where it was just never enough. There's just never enough you could do, never enough you could say, and when you did, it was never the right thing, and it was never enough. It was just a moving target. But the same steps to healing well from that, whether it's physical abuse or verbal abuse or emotional abuse, which are really all tied in together, I think that a sucker punch to the man's pride or to a man's gut is just as bad as a black eye in a lot of ways. It's a soft tissue injury internal and causes internal bleeding. It's just not visible, but it's just as violently destructive as the physical abuser, and that's the same for women as well.
Well, this is not a gender issue. This is a victimization issue. This is about abuse, which doesn't, just because more women experience this doesn't mean it's less important for the men that are struggling in these kind of relationships too. And I'd like to touch base on the point you raised a minute ago about the biblical reason to leave. I personally am not a theologian, although I have studied the scriptures in regard to this. And my position on that, Eric, is that abuse severs the marital covenant. Mm-hmm. I do believe that. I believe if a victim of abuse chooses to legally end the relationship, she or he is merely legally carrying out what the abuser already spiritually broke. And so I really, for any of your listeners that may be dealing with this right now, I don't tell people to stay or go. I don't tell people to divorce or not. But what I do tell them is that when Christ went to the cross, he went to the cross for people and not institutions. Marriage is an institution. He died for people. So it's very important that we separate those two. And we place proper value on what God values. He values human life and the sanctity of human life. And when you're being abused, that's not happening.
Well, you're exactly right. You've created 12 steps for healing well and living free from an abusive relationship that you shared with me. And I want to talk about some of those and kind of frame them because the first one is break the silence. And I kind of think about, okay, well, how do I break the silence? How do I share, and who do I share with when I tell this secret that this is going on? I didn't tell anybody. I didn't feel that I could tell anybody because I was ashamed. I was in fear that one, I would not be believed. That was the first part of it, that there would be no credibility because there was no overt evidence. So that if I spoke this to somebody, they'd say, well, I've never borne witness to that you're just imagining this, or it's your problem, because it's not done publicly. These are not public displays. In ministry, as you know, there's kind of an arm's length, and finding a safe person is really hard to do when you're at the top of the congregation or the top of the ministry. A safe person is really not within arm's reach because you've kept everybody at arm's length. So that also has some challenges. But also breaking the silence to train domestic violence counselor. I never saw myself as being, I do now see it as domestic violence, but in it, in the pot, I was just a frog.
Right. Right.
So how do, I think that the first step should be break the silence. I'm just trying to think of the practical and the reality of in the position that I was in. Now I have this voice and this, and I wouldn't have even done it on my talk radio show. It's only with the advent of television and the fact that I surround myself with people like yourself, who you are one of my safe people. I just happen to have 1.5 million people watching our safe session together, and I was one of your safe people to tell your story when we first met. I became one of your safe people when you went public with your story, and we had psychological voyeurs get to sit in on this private conversation that you and I both agreed we were going to take to the world, and we were going to kind of blow the whistle on abusive relationships, and we were going to use ourselves, both of us, as not pointing to people that we've counseled, not pointing to others, but we were going to make this, we were going to break the silence with each other and through each other and create this safe place for people to watch how it's done and hopefully encourage them to get the book and to find the help that they need, because they're seeing two successful adults who appear to have lived blessed lives confess, nope, beneath the surface was, it was literally putting marble on a septic tank.
Right, right, exactly. Exactly. Well, you know, one of the things that I like to tell people is that until we call it what it is, we're going to call it what it's not. And so for many years, I referred to what was happening to me as a conflict resolution problem, you know, because remember, I was studying psychology, so I knew all the phrases to use, you know, that we had a communication problem. He didn't know how to express his feelings, you know, and so I had to learn to call it what it is. And to admit that what was happening to me was in fact abusive. No one likes to think of themselves, at least I haven't met anyone, as a quote victim. But domestic violence is a crime. And when there's a crime, there's a victim. There's a perpetrator and there's a victim. And so, you know, for me, it actually happened one night when a friend of, well, Chelsea is how I refer to her in the book, but my best friend of now 30-something years, she came across the phrase cycle of abuse. And this is years ago. And she called me up one day and she says, I think this may be what's happening to you. You should look this word up. So in the middle of the night, I got up while Ben was sleeping and I went to the computer and I Googled it. And Eric, my hand was sweating on that mouse, shaking. As I was reading, I was like, this is what I'm in. I'm smack dab in the middle of a pattern. But until you start to educate yourself, until you start to ask yourself the tough questions like, how have I changed? My brother asked me, he came out to visit, this is years ago, and we went for a walk, and because my family lived on the West Coast and we lived in the South. And he stopped in the middle of our walk. It was just the two of us. And this is a real straight shooter brother of mine. And he said, he gently took him by the shoulders and he said to me, you've changed. He said, what's wrong with you? You've changed. And I got defensive. And I said, well, what do you mean I've changed? I haven't changed. And he said, oh, no, you have. And I said, well, how have I changed? And he said, you've lost your moxie. And in our family, that means your spunk, your spice. And, you know, people that know me know that I definitely have that wired into my personality. And abuse will drain that. Abuse will suck the life out of your soul. And like you said, you were driving to go preach and tears coming down your face. Same with me. Because I was still in private practice. I actually stepped, and I want your listeners to know this, I stepped out of private practice for over 6 years because the incongruency between telling clients to live in truth and me living this big lie just was destroying me mentally, emotionally, spiritually, even physically. And so I stepped away, and it was during that 6-year period that I sought a counselor, and I ended up actually working with 3 different therapists to just help me do all the steps in my book, basically. You know, they helped me walk through the healing process. And we can't do it alone. We need community. And that's what we're doing right now, Eric. You're right. By us having this conversation, we're a type of community. People can jump in and listen. and they're connecting with community, because we do not heal in isolation, we heal in community. So hats off to you for having these type of conversations.
You talk about calling it what it is. It's abuse.
Right.
And the first time you actually recognize that it's abuse, my response was grief, and my response was tears. I mean, I literally, as I went to preach on Friday night, as I backed the car out of the driveway, once I got away from the house, I had Psalm 13 playing, "How long, O Lord, are you going to keep me in this? You know, look upon me and answer." And it was just such grief. It just poured out of me. And then when I would come to the BP station, which was 2 blocks away from the synagogue, I knew that was the sign. When I saw the BP sign, okay, you got to pull yourself together. And I would take anointing oil that I had in my glove compartment. And as I was there at that intersection, which was always a long light, I could anoint my beard with oil. I could wipe my face with oil so that I would smell like frankincense and myrrh. I would look like I had this glow, and I didn't wear glasses at the time, so I had eye drops that would take the red out, and that was the routine. And I would dry my eyes, and by the time I pulled in, I had now had my face on and my stuff together to be able to walk in and boldly go preach a message. And I would find myself lingering in my office longer and longer after services. You know, 700, 800 people have left. I'm the only one there. Didn't want to go home. Tried to calculate the time, make sure that by the time I get home, she's asleep. There can't be any communication. There can't be any conflict. There, you know, just did everything I could to and found myself spending more time devoted to managing this than to dealing with it. You're right that grieving, once you come to the realization that the first response is grief, and I don't know.
The reason. Go ahead.
My question to you, was I grieving for me, or was I grieving for the loss of the relationship, or my grip on reality? What was it I was actually grieving?
Well, what I have found is that when we come to that place where we begin to acknowledge that this is not something we can manage or we're supposed to manage, and we begin to exercise that courage to call it what it is, grief sets in, because on the heels of that is that recognition and that sense of loss. This is not what I signed up for. This is not who I thought this person was, or now I'm recognizing is. And so when there's loss, there's grief. And so we're going to go through a plethora of emotions when we're grieving, whether it be anger or depression, or many of us will bargain, especially people in abusive relationships. If I do this, then they'll do this. If I don't do this, then they won't do this. God, if I do this, then you'll give me this. You know, we can spend a long time in the bargaining phase of grieving, you know. But to heal well, we have to grieve well. And to grieve, we have to feel. And in order to feel, we need to talk. And that's why telling our story, even if it starts just with us. See, it started with you, Eric, when you first started admitting to yourself that this is not something I can change. We cannot change them. It's hard enough to change myself, let alone attempt to try to change someone else. But we believe this. We believe, especially as Christians, if we pray more, if we fast, if we whatever, we have all sorts of thoughts, then this, I'll get the miracle that I'm praying for. Right. But the miracle's often me changing. Same with you.
When I confronted the abuse, it was met with betrayal. And that's what finally ended and was finally the door out, was because of the betrayal. and it uncovered other things that led to a biblical foundation for me being able to walk away. But I had to have been met with that severe betrayal, and I literally confronted the abuse and said that, and I was getting ready to go to Israel. I said, when I return, there's going to be changes made. And during that 10-day period of time that I was gone, this betrayal was orchestrated. And I returned to be confronted by the betrayal, which was the response to my saying, changes are going to be coming. And so it was as if there was like a whole army waiting for me to get off the plane and launch this attack, trying to thwart my breakthrough. And I knew my breakthrough was coming. And basically, I sat there and I listened to this. And they said, do you have anything to say? And I said, no, I have nothing to say. This is all confirmation to me that this is as it should be, and now I have everything I need to move forward with what I know I need to do in order to heal and to leave this situation. And so out of that, confronting the abuser, and the abuse and the follow-on betrayal, which was devastating in itself, that sent me to therapy and sent me to really look at the core as to what I allowed to occur in my life and what was it about me that allowed me to accept this for such a period of time. And that's part of the things that we're going to talk about in our next segment, because as I told you over the weekend, we're not going to be able to get through all of this because we have just so much to talk about. That's why we have you on every month, and we're going to have you back on October 15th at the 11 o'clock Central Time hour during National Abuse Awareness Month. And we're going to talk about this cycle of abuse. We're going to talk about education. We're going to talk about avoiding shortcuts that make it so that they're Band-Aids, but they're not long-term, and really kind of approach this as to how do we deal with this. We'll review calling it what it is and go back over some of the initial steps. But Dr. Ramona, once again, an amazing conversation with two dear friends. I consider you, as I told you over the weekend, welcome to the family. You are my safe person to have these conversations with. We just have a couple million people sitting in on our session.
Well, likewise, I really appreciate you giving a voice to so many people that aren't where we're at yet, but they can be.
They can be, and that's exactly right, because we want to be the voice of hope so they know that they can heal well and can live free from an abusive relationship, from victim to survivor to overcomer. And today we are overcomers by the word of our testimony and the blood of the Lamb and the work that we did to get here. Dr. Ramona Probasco, thank you. Get this book, Amazon.com, also ignitinganation.com, and this is a breakthrough work, and this is why we have Dr. Ramona on the third Monday of every month at this hour. Dr. Ramona Probasco, God bless you and keep you, and may the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you and give you his peace. Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.